And you were raised in Germantown, weren't you, Frank?
Yeah, I lived at 2306 Lotus, and my cousin Tom, who was Dan's boy, lived at 2396 Lotus. They lived at on the south end of the block. My dad was Henry, lived on the north end of the block. The houses are still there, and the houses were built by a Russian, Henry Haas. And he was a builder in those days. And
Now, would that be any relation to Gilbert Axe that worked for
no,
you?
Haas.
Oh.
Haas. Haas, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Haas.
So, yeah, when you were talking about mostly Germans working for you, it was that way in Germantown. That's where a lot of the kids got their first job.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them. Irene Weslowski, that was her first job out of high school. And she worked for us for over 30 years.
Wow. But the other merchants
35,
the other merchants in Germantown too hired people from Germantown.
Oh yeah. Well, there was another beer distributor that was my dad's first cousin, a Diel company. They were the Regal Pale distributors. Okay, and they got Regal in about 1935, and they were actually competitors to my dad and uncle. And that family had a Dan and a Henry in it. Our family had a Dan and a Henry in it. Okay, and the only way they could keep them separate, we were the Acme Deals and they were the Regal Deals. And they had a lot of Germans working for them too.
Wow.
And in fact, some of the guys that used to work for them, they sold out to the brewery in about 1953 or 54. And it was the brewery branch.
Okay.
The Regal Brewery owned the distributorship. And that Diel family, they kept the warehouse, rented it to the brewery.
Okay. Franklin, one we can't figure out, maybe you can solve the riddle. Was Fred Gerhardt a Russian?
Sure he was.
Okay.
We bought beer trucks from him. Yeah.
One of
He had
his
Commercial Body Works.
Yep.
And he had a boy named, he lived on Lotus, but I think he didn't go to high school, or they moved, I think they moved to the north end of town. But Fred built race cars too. He had race cars in the Indianapolis 500.
one of his
Like I say, he made beer bodies, beer trucks. We would buy the chassis, take it out to him. He would drop the frame and put a beer truck body on it. And we'd always have some repair work that had to be done. And I'd take the truck out to get it repaired. And one of our guys would pick me up, or my cousin would pick me up, Tom, and take me back. But when we'd go out there, they had a separate building over there that they built race cars in. Fred Gerhardt, sometimes some years, built as high as 10 Indy cars.
I think that many.
And he sold them to people. They had Offenhauser engines in them. And he was right next to where they made David and Son seeds, sunflower seeds.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And if you're a Russian, you had to choose seeds.
Still do.
And you knew how to put them in your mouth and spit them out, not one at a time like these English people do. English. Are you German? Are you German?
Yeah,
You're
Oschlager.
Oschlager, okay.
Oschlager, yeah.
Well, the Russians ate seeds.
Oh, yeah.
My
They grow their own
grandmother,
sunflowers, too.
the
Make their own
Russians
seeds.
ate a lot of watermelons, too.
Oh, yeah.
For the company picnic, we would go to Oberg's Market and we'd buy T-bone steaks for everybody. And the kids that worked for our employees, they would come, and their wives or their girlfriends. Most of them weren't married, but there was a few that had girlfriends. And my mother would, they would make coleslaw. They would make potato salad. They would buy, and we had a lot of employees in those days. At the end, we had over 100 employees. We had 107 employees, men, when we quit, and we had about 5 or 6 girls in the office, and had some warehousemen. But we would buy from Dennis Olberg, we'd buy smoked sausage, fresh sausage, and he'd make a few pounds of liver sausage. And, with these other nationalities that we had working for us, some of them never ate German sausage, liver sausage, we'd get them to try it. Some of them liked it, some of them didn't. In the real old days, my dad and uncle, they would allow on a hot day, and I'm talking about the Acme beer days, if a guy was out at Mendota and he had to drive back in, if he had a beer or two at the last stop and drove in, they didn't care about that, But of course the guy couldn't come in drunk, but it's different nowadays. I don't know if it's for the better or for the worse, but did you know some of you probably knew Riney, I know.
Yes.
See, during the war, they had to get a lot of kids right out of high school.
Yeah.
Phil Herstein was one of them. Then he later went to work for R.L. Tawney and Son. They delivered beer up in the mountains, and we sold them beer, and they took it up in the mountains. But there was a lot of, during the war, there was a lot of people, they had a problem keeping enough guys because a lot of them got drafted. Like Mel Forth and Billy, they came to work for us after World War II. They came to work about 1945, 46.
Now you said the Steinhauers played at your wedding?
Yeah, I was married in August the 14th, 1976. And we had I was married at the Cross Church on Palm Avenue by Reverend Hammelman. I can't remember what his first name was.
Howard.
I never called him Reverend. I always called him Reverend Hammelman. What was his
Howard.
First? Howard, okay. And I was confirmed by Carl Meyer. And I was baptized by Kistler. And my mother and father were baptized in the Cross Church, married in the Cross Church, and my father and mother were both buried in the Cross Church.
And your mother was a Metzler, and you're related to Larry Metzler.
Well, my mother was a sister to Alex Metzler, the baseball player. Now, Henry Metzler is Larry Metzler's dad. That was my mother's first cousin.
Oh.
Now, there's some Metzlers in Sanger, and a lot of people get them mixed up because they all had kids with the same first name and no middle names. And those were the Sanger Metzlers, and we were the Easton Metzlers, and Larry is the Biola Metzlers.
Did you have any kin to Augie Metzler that had A&M Beauty Supply?
Yeah, that was, she was related to my mother, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it was right over here.
Yeah.
My mother used to get hair done there.
Marion.
Marion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We lived next door to her kids.
Yeah. See, and
And
he's
they were Augie's stepkids. One of them sold beauty supplies in a Volkswagen,
Oh, you're right.
and the other one, Louis, I don't know whatever
Yeah.
became of him, but we
Yeah.
lived out there on Grantland, and they lived around the corner on Bullard.
Bompresi, there was a Melvin Bompresi. He had a bar when we delivered beer to him at where the Belmont Circle is. You know where the Belmont
Yeah,
Circle
yeah.
Voting Park? That was the Villa d'Italia. that was Melvin Bonpressy, and I'm going back a long time. You guys maybe are too young. You don't remember.
Maybe.
Yeah, the
But see, I got
Bombay-
into all these places when we were kids. You have them as members here too. Eleanor and Eleanor Raymer and Bernice. John Raymer was my father and uncle. Him and George Snyder were my father's first two employees. And John Raymer was the first employee that retired from Diel Brothers. And he worked from John went to work for my dad in 1933. That's when Prohibition ended.
Okay.
April 7th, 1933. That was the end of Prohibition. John worked for Sperry Flour Company for 25 years. And Sperry Flour Company was on Fresno, about where the water tank is,
Okay.
on Fresno Street. Sperry Flour. They milled flour. He worked there for 25 years. One Friday night, the plant closed. I don't know how many guys worked there, but maybe there was 20 guys or whatever it was. He lost his job. The next day, that spread over Germantown overnight that this plant closed. And they needed him. And he was the first employee. They hired John. He went to work on a Monday morning. And he worked for Diel Brothers for 35 years. As kids,
But I remember the name.
when we were out of school, my father would send Tom or me, or both of us, at vacation time, they would send us with one of our employees. We were just kids. And we'd go with this one and go with that one. And we knew all these routes, because we were riding with these guys. And they would introduce us as kids to the owner of the place. He owned a bar or a grocery store. So we got to know a lot of
Good way to
this.
learn.
Huh?
Good way to learn.
We got an education that you can't get out of
You
a
can't
book.
buy it.
And he'd tell the person he sent us with, if these kids don't act right, I want to know about it. And they
You
would
always
have to
have to go
report
home. Yeah.
on us. If they'd say do something, and we'd say no, that I don't want to do that. That'd get reported back to our father.
And that's why
That
you
was
grew
good.
up.
That's exactly how they would, when we first started in the warehouses, Tommy Baker, he worked in the warehouse, and my dad would tell Tommy, if these guys don't do it, in those days, there was no forklifts when we were kids. It was all by hand. A semi-load of beer would come in, and you had metal rollers,
Right.
and you put the roller up in the back of the semi. One guy would pitch, two guys would catch down at the end and stack them. And you had to pull them off the thing. We didn't have a forklift until we got Ham's beer in 1954. Ham's was palletized,
Okay.
and
Pallets.
that's when we got the first forklift. And we didn't buy a new one either. There was my dad found there was an auction up at Sharp Depot. It's up around Stockton.
Yeah.
And I can remember I was in high school, and he took me up there on a Saturday morning with him. And there had to be 300 forklifts for sale. 300 of them in a line. And you could start them and run them. And the first one we bought up there, he paid $800 for it. That was a lot of money. $800, you could buy a Chevy car for $1,200. Forklift, my dad said, for God's sakes, these things cost that much money, you know, and these weren't new, these were used. And it cost us almost as much money to have Valley Motor Lines pick it up there, haul it back down to Fresno.
Valley Motor Lines.
It was a tow motor LT 144. It lifted 12 feet up. And we wanted to go 12 feet up, that way we could double deck. Then later on, we had forklifts that would go 3 high. They would go, you know, the pallet is, we were 20 feet off the ground with the top row. But it would take, in the old days, a semi-load of beer would take about 3 hours to unload. That was 3 guys. With a forklift, you could do it in about 20 minutes.
Forklift paid for itself, didn't it?
Yeah.